Okay, so if I say the word hero to you girls, what are some of the words that come to mind?
Strong.
Yeah.
Tall. Handsome.
Brave. Handsome, was it brave? Yeah. Any other words?
Muscles.
Thanks. Anything else, guys? Okay, so maybe some of the people that you're thinking of is someone like this. Muscles. Or maybe some of you it's someone like this. Or perhaps even someone like this. Now, ideologically, a hero is someone who possesses qualities of strength or bravery, and they're admired for these. And I'm sure that none of you are surprised to hear that these qualities are all things that have been used to describe Othello, the Moor of Venice. But looking at this picture of hero that we've created here, does it not seem strange that the man who's often described as the hero in Shakespeare's Othello is also the man who killed his wife? Now, while many of us are quick to label Othello as the noble, strong hero, there have also been many Shakespeare commentators who have criticised Othello for being a man of weak will. Now, as readers and viewers of the play, it's our responsibility to review what Othello's title of hero really means. Do we want to simply come to the conclusion that he was a strong man, or was he weaker than many of us admit? Now, it's important that we go into this with open minds. It's often our own emotional attachment to a story like this that causes our better moral judgment to be paused for a second, as Othello magically becomes the perfect hero, Desdemona the spotless saint, and Iago the evil villain. Now, to understand the two perceptions of Othello, we need to look at both arguments. Today, we'll look at the argument for Othello the strong and the argument for Othello the weak. One Shakespeare commentator described their view on Othello the strong when they said, Othello is like a hero of the ancient world, in that he is not a man like us, but a man recognised as extraordinary. He has the obvious heroic qualities of courage and strength, and he also has the heroic capacity for passion. Now, throughout the play, a number of characters refer to Othello's strong good nature. We see this in lines such as the Duke's description of Othello in Act 1, Scene 3, when he says, your son-in-law is far more fair than black. Shakespeare suggests to the viewers that Othello is of a pure soul, a trustworthy man who is well respected by those around him. And even near the end of the play, Lodovico describes how he knew Othello. In this quote, which I now ask Susie to read aloud for us.
The noble Moor, whom our false innate call all in all sufficient, the nature whom passion could not shake, whose solid virtue the shot of accident, nor dart of chance, could neither graze nor pierce.
Thank you, Susie. So I think in this quote we really see how Othello was viewed as an almost godlike figure, a man that was so in control that nothing could graze nor pierce him. And we also see how Othello exercises high respect for his seniors in his address to the council in Scene 3, Act 1. When Othello is called to the council chambers in the middle of his wedding night, he addresses his company with the following lines, which Olivia will now read aloud for us.
Most potent, grave, and reverend seniors, my very noble and proved good masters.
Oh, thanks, Olivia. So here we see how Othello, despite his disruption to his evening, still shows great composure and respect for his company. I want to ask of you, do you think that Othello's respectful manner made him strong? I have here a continuum line, which is what you all have your pieces of paper for. If you'd be able to write on your pieces of paper, weak and strong, at both ends, or one at each end. And if you'd also be able to mark on your continuum where you think Othello's respectful manner comes. Okay? So I also have a little card here. If one of you would be able to come up to the front of the class and put it on our class continuum as to where you think this action belongs. Olivia? Do you want to just quickly say why you put it there? Or?
I put it further up towards strong and weak because he shows quite a bit of respect even though he's been interrupted and Brent's a bit frustrated about being interrupted.
Yeah. Cool, thank you very much. So another trait of strength that Othello possessed was his leadership qualities within the military. Now, while Othello's previous military experience is mentioned a number of times in the play, his major leadership role that we as viewers see is his dismissal of Cassio as lieutenant in Cyprus. So when Cassio is involved in a drunken brawl, Othello has to overlook their friendship and consider Cassio's liabilities to the rest of his men. We see this in Othello's following lines to Cassio. Cassio, I love thee, but never more be an officer of mine. Now, this is another action to put in our continuum here. Do we think that Othello's dismissal of Cassio was a sign of strength or a sign of weakness? Okay, would someone be willing to come put this up on the continuum as to where you place it? Oh, Mariana?
Just because, like you said, like Cassio was a friend and stuff, but he dismissed him anyway. He didn't put like friendship ties before his job.
Cool, thank you. So, considering that these traits of strength that we've just looked at, one does have to ask how Othello came so undone. Now, from this side of the argument, many critics have blamed Iago for his malicious manipulations. Romantic poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge commented on Othello's downfall in his essay on Othello when he said, "We must remember that Othello does not kill Desdemona in jealousy, but in a conviction forced upon him in the almost superhuman art of Iago." And this could just be the case. Othello was a good man, but he was exploited by evil. And this manipulation could just be justification for Othello's murder of Desdemona. However, Othello himself had a different justification, telling the audience how it would be an act of honour. Now, Othello reassured himself it was the right action when he said, it is the cause, my soul. She must die, else she'll betray more men." Also, after his realisation of what he had done, Othello described to his company his actions, describing himself as an honourable murderer, if you will. "For naught I did it in hate, but all in honour." Now, this is quite a hard one, but I'm going to ask you where you think Othello's action of murdering Desdemona comes on your continuums. Would anyone be willing to come put it up on our class continuum up here? As to where you put it down, Susie? It's quite interesting. Why did you put it up there?
Because I think the way Shakespeare wrote it and in the time period that it was written, it was considered an honourable thing. And we see it today as something, as murder, but they saw it as an honour. So stick to the way it was written, I think.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that, Susie. So, we'll now move on to look at Othello the Weak. Many critics have argued that Othello is weak and gullible for falling for Iago's tricks, and that a strong man would have withstood the manipulations. Now, within these views, Othello is seen as responsible for his downfall at the hand of his own weaknesses. Let's start by looking at Othello's passion. Now, Othello's passion was probably one of the largest contributing factors to his downfall. When Iago suggested to Othello Desdemona's infidelity, Othello responded with utmost passion, firstly questioning why he was ever married, and then using violent language and imagery in his fit of rage towards Desdemona. We see this in the following lines, which Mariana is going to read aloud for us.
"O monstrous, monstrous, I'll tear her to pieces. Arise, black vengeance, from thy hollow cell."
But not only this, when Othello was coming undone, he was also the last to admit his emotional weaknesses, as he argues to Iago how he was, not much moved. However, when Othello does admit his loss of control, he suggests that he is too far gone to return to sanity, which we see in these lines. "Oh now, forever, farewell the tranquil mind, farewell content." This trait, Othello's incapability to control his emotions, can be easily interpreted as signs of a weak man. While Iago may have provided a trigger for Othello, it was from within Othello that all the hidden passion emerged. Some critics have even suggested that Iago's malice came from within Othello. Dr. Levis, a very famous Shakespeare commentator, saying, Iago represents something that is in Othello. The mind that ruins him is not Iago, but in himself. You cannot blame an evil character for Othello's downfall. His madness came from within. Now, would one of you, firstly, all of you, would you be able to mark down on your continuum where you think Othello's passion came along the continuum? And would one of you be able to come put it up on our class continuum here? I know you guys have all marked it down on your own thing, so if you'd be able to come put it up. Laurel? Cool. So the next one, or if you want to.
Well, just because like you said, passion is such a deep emotion that it causes a lot of downfall, and mine's sort of more this way, but sort of in the middle because it can just things good questions.
Yeah. And I think that brings up something we talked about in class last term, where there's a difference between riding your passion and letting your passion ride you, which is perhaps when it stops being a strength and starts being a weakness. So another trait of weakness that many critics have argued is Othello's reliance on his military strength. One critic has said that a strong man would not rely so heavily on just one aspect of their life in the same way that Othello did military. And even so, his military strength did not always translate to other areas of his life. When it came to trust, many have argued that it was Othello's military confidence that caused him to so easily trust Iago. Othello never questioned of himself if he had befriended the wrong man, and instead almost reassured himself that he had. And there's many lines about Iago, of which we have two here that Claudia is going to read aloud for us.
His fellows of exceeding honesty and noble qualities with a learned spirit of human dealings. And O brave Iago, just honest and just, thou teachest me.
Cool, thank you. So I have here the action of Othello's friendship with Iago, if you'd be able to mark that down on your continuums. And would someone be able to come put it up the front for us? Mariana? I've got a strong view on this one. Do you want to tell us why you went there?
Because like he put his full trust in one man, and like if you had a friend who was telling you, whispering in your ear, oh, your boyfriend's being unfaithful, you probably take the hint that this, he's not the sort of person you want to hang around with. So.
Cool. Thank you. So that actually led quite nicely on to my next point here, how Othello's military confidence was a weakness when it came to trusting women. Now, while he was told from two women, both Desdemona and Emilia, of Desdemona's fidelity, he chose instead to ignore it, better trusting the word of a single man. We see this in his musings over Emilia's claims, as he says, she says enough, yet she is a simple board who cannot say as much. Also, when Othello replies to Desdemona's claims of honesty, he suggests that she is lying as well, saying, come, swear it, damn thyself. Heaven truly knows that thou art as false as hell. Now, it's also Othello who chooses to strike Desdemona, and in a public place. To consider this, a man who had once held such pride in public situations, as we saw in his address to the council earlier, was to then strike his wife in public, suggested that some serious undoing had occurred. As Othello himself commented, he was a man who had come undone. Now, when he slaps her, Othello once again suggests that her pain and hurt is a lie, saying these lines, which Nicole will now read aloud for us.
O devil, devil, if the earth could tame a woman's tears, each drop she falls would prove a crocodile out of us.
Cool. So I have this action here, Othello striking Desdemona in public. Would you be able to mark that along the continuum as to where you think it comes? Is anyone able to come put it up on the class board for us? Olivia? Yeah. Yeah.
I put it in front of my good friend Iago because I think at that point his passion had kind of changed his changed his personal mindset. So I think it was driven by the fact he was already over the edge. So it was more like an uncontrolled action than trusting Iago.
Cool. Thank you for that, Olivia. So the last section that we'll look at today, and one that I really think is impossible to look at if we're going to consider Othello as strong or weak, is Othello's suicide. Now, suicide in Shakespearean times could be seen as a two-sided issue. On the religious hand, it was viewed as an action of shame and dismay, and it represented an immediate condemnation to hell. But on the other hand, in the developing Renaissance tradition of gentlemanly honour, it could also be viewed as an act of nobility and strength. Also, in our modern day context, Othello's suicide could be viewed in a more Christian light of a weak man who was not accepting full responsibility for his actions. I want to ask of you, how do you think Othello's suicide reflected his character? Did it make him strong, or did it make him weak? Oh, is it? Do you want to talk about that?
I get strong because he did accept that he was wrong, and he sort of, he found out that this one was faithful because he'd committed a crime. He knew that he had to sort of do it to himself.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So, looking at this continuum that we have here, and I'm sure all your continuums as well, Othello appears to be quite spread out. Now, the truth is that Othello was the hero of the play. Shakespeare always wrote his tragedies with the hero. However, the purpose of Shakespeare's heroes were quite different to what we imagine today when we think of Superman and the like. Shakespeare's heroes were tragic heroes, who were often destroyed by their own passion. Now, from Aristotle's definition of a tragic hero, Othello was a man who fell from grace to misery and catastrophe. The hero must possess one fatal flaw, which I think in Othello's case was his passion. And then, once they've made their mistake, they recognise the weight of what they've done. And lastly, a sense of catharsis must exist at the end of the play, with the hero's final act. And I think we can all agree that we felt liberated by Othello's suicide. I think that by creating this tragic hero as the centrepiece of his play, Shakespeare shows us as viewers how even those who appear perfect, as invincible as Othello, can be broken. However, Shakespeare also reminds us that while bad things can happen to good people, it doesn't make them bad people. They are, after all, only human. And even our heroes have flaws. Just look at this man here. Now, he was one of America's greatest heroes, responsible for many good things, but that didn't mean that he wasn't infamous for his womanizing abilities. Well, what about this man here? I'm sure we're all familiar with his flaws, but he was also one of America's greatest sporting heroes and admired for many, many years. Or another interesting case is O.J. Simpson. He was one of America's greatest football heroes, and he fell far from grace when he was accused of the murder of his white wife. Sounds slightly familiar? So perhaps we can not simply come to the conclusion that Othello was the perfect hero, but really Shakespeare's characters were never one-dimensional. We cannot define Othello as simply strong or simply weak. He was merely human, with some strengths and some flaws. And I think at the end of the day, it really depends on who was telling the story.